Hi guys, Artie here, and today I'll be ranking all of the Cartoon Network eras in the US from worst to best. A few of you guys suggested this idea on my community post, and I thought it would be very interesting to talk about, since I haven't covered most of the Cartoon Network eras yet. The ranking will be based on how good the overall branding, bumpers, and identity is, the scheduling, shows that premiered or were currently running, and a slight hint of nostalgia. I can't lie about that last one. Alright, let's get the worst one out of the way first. The Dimensional Era that ran from 2017 all the way to 2021. A tiring 5 years. I'm also going to lump in the mashup and bullpen eras in with it since they ran alongside Dimensional and were also boring. I'm also going to keep this one short, since I already made a whole video about why this era was a train wreck and ruined Cartoon Network's image and reputation. You should go check it out before watching this video if you haven't seen it yet. The Dimensional Era marked the true decline and downfall of Cartoon Network. Without a doubt, the worst era of the channel. To sum it up, this was around the time they began to spam Teen Titans Go. Non-stop, all day, every day, at the expense of other currently running shows. Not only that, they decided to pretend that regular show didn't exist for some odd reason that was never later explained. At least Fall Era aired reruns of ended shows and classic cartoons occasionally, and gave new episodes of their own shows plentiful promotion. Meanwhile, the Dimensional Era pretended as if the archival content simply didn't exist, except during Christmas or Halloween. Hell, they didn't even do anything special during the 25th anniversary. Hands down, the worst scheduling in the channel's history. I really despise how channels in general stop airing older shows because apparently only new shows matter, according to the networks. Even then, the new shows that did come out around this time, such as OKKO and Mau Mau, were good, but didn't last very long because of the AT&T merger and received very little airtime just to make way for more Teen Titans Go marathons and reruns. The branding and bumpers were tacky and repetitive. It made you miss the old Cartoon Network even more. New shows never really got a chance. Terrible management and horrendous scheduling. It was bad all around and what made many people give up on the channel, even though it has gotten better recently. You all saw this coming. This is the worst era on the list. The next ones that come on the rankings are just really mediocre and not flat out awful. I hate to say it, but the second worst era is Redraw Your World, which ran from 2021 to 2022, but not for the reason you think it is. The bumpers and branding were okay, and definitely a breath of fresh air from Dimensional. But the programming still sucked, and this was basically Cartoon Network's recovery period. The scheduling was nearly identical to Dimensional, but with a teensy bit more variety. The main reason why this era suffered was due to all the mergers going on around this time, and of course, the tax write-offs and the great HBO Max purge of 2022. I really wanted to give this one a chance. Third worst era is the Fall Era, which ran from 2007 to 2008, even well after the fall season ended. Sadly, I was born too late, so this is the oldest CN era I can vaguely remember from when I was a toddler. Ironically, the Fall Era was considered the first fall of Cartoon Network, and when they started diving into live-action programming, such as Out of Jimmy's Head. The leadership at the time wanted to transform Cartoon Network from an animation-centric network to on par with Nickelodeon and Disney as a children's network. So that's why they decided to introduce live-action shows, just like their competition had, and it failed hard. They would later reattempt this during the Redraw Your World era, and it never came to be, thanks to the Warner Bros. Discovery merger. At least one good thing came from that greedy acquisition. Whatever it takes for CN not to air live-action content ever again, go for it. Say what you want, but The Fall is just something that grown-ups invented song is actually kind of catchy. It was just extremely repetitive and it was played way too much. The designs for the bumpers are decent, but nothing to write home about, and are nothing compared to the highly creative and genius bumpers that came from the previous eras. It's crazy to think how much times have changed, and back in the day, we never thought it would get worse than this. Or get better. Next up, the Noods and Prefuse eras. I'm also combining these two together, since they aired concurrently and were very similar in terms of identity. The era originally began in 2008 and concluded in 2010. First thing I want to get out of the way is that the hate for these eras are blown out of proportion. Definitely when compared to the Dimensional Era, which would come later. They would air reruns of not only ended original shows, but also classic cartoons like Tom and Jerry on a regular basis. The main reason why this era was unfathomably hated, alongside Fall Era, is because this is when many of the original cartoons started to end, and they introduced CN Real to the channel, and it was disastrous. Although to be fair, the live-action content only aired a few days out of the week, and was relegated to primetime hours. It didn't take over the channel completely, not just that, it took them until 2014 to finally eliminate all live action programming completely and focus solely on animated content, but not many people mention that. Another issue with these two eras is that instead of producing original animated content, they decided to rely on and import Canadian cartoons, such as Johnny Test, Total Drama, and 16 to mix results and varying success. Not to say they were bad, because some of them were great, but it felt like they didn't have to produce much if they could just air acquired shows. At least we got Chowder and Flapjack out of this mini dark age. The Noods bumpers weren't amazing, but they were definitely charming for the time, and it was interesting to see the characters interact. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if those furry transformation artists decided to use the Noods dummy figures concept, or characters, in the future, since they are used to represent characters from the shows and can also transform. You're welcome for the idea. I also like the primetime oriented Prefuse bumpers for the energy and the Let's Go song they used. However, it did not fit Cartoon Network and would be more at home on some place like Fox. Noods and Prefuse were mediocre, but not terrible and as bad as people claimed it to be at the time. Now we're getting to the middle of the road eras, with the first one being the Pastel Era, which is Cartoon Network's current branding that has been in use since 2022. So far, the scheduling has been a huge improvement over the Dimensional Era, and many people still haven't realized that and still think CN spams Teen Titans Go all day, but that is no longer the case. Also, they finally care about regular show again, and airs quite a bit these days. Finally. I also like the concept of the branding being a lo-fi theme, but I really feel like they could have gone further with this idea by using vaporwave backgrounds, designs, and gradients, and maybe overlaid a cheap VHS filter to give it a more authentic feel. The bumpers and station IDs are too minimalistic and lazy, not to mention the pink and green Barney looking colors don't really fit the Cartoon Network theme, and would be more at home on a preschool channel like PBS Kids. Thankfully, in more recent next bumpers, they are starting to incorporate the CYMK color scheme they have been using since 2010 once again. The main factor that makes Pastel inferior to the rest coming up is the lack of new original shows, and the broadcast day being cut down to 11 hours. However, the variety and consistency of the schedule lately definitely makes up for it. I'll take this schedule any day over the horrendous trash fest schedules we got from 2017 through 2021. At least Cartoon Network is getting back on track, and I'm sure it will get better from here. They can only do so much when cable is on the road to death, and not to mention the ever-changing media landscape. If you want to learn more about my opinions on the Pastel Era, check out the 2 videos I made regarding this era. Next up, the Yes Era that ran from 2006 to 2007, that ran alongside CN City and borrowed many elements from said era, and by extension, summer 2007. I don't have much to say about this one, other than it was too simplistic and inferior to CN City in every way imaginable. The quote bumpers and the characters doing and saying random things in front of a red background were alright I guess, but nothing too special. Programming and scheduling is the exact same as CN City, but I'll talk about that once I get to that era. We've finally made it to Cartoon Network's very first branding, that being the Checkerboard Era that ran from 1992's launch all the way up to 1998, and by extension, the Starburst Era. As the name implies, the bumpers feature checkerboard shapes and designs, which could include tiles of characters and elements from the shows featured on the network in a checkerboard pattern. For a launch branding, this was actually a pretty good idea. The reason why I put the Checkerboard Era lower than you would expect is because it was still the early days of the channel, and they were still finding their footing. Also, they barely had any original programming yet, and it was just the classics 24 hours a day, such as Looney Tunes, The Flintstones, and Top Cat. The scheduling was insane, and they aired a different cartoon every 30 minutes. The bumpers and station IDs were unmatched for the time, and definitely the highlight of this era. It feels so antique, but revolutionary at the same time. Not to mention that the upcoming MeTV Toons channel will recapture the magic of the Checkerboard Era, according to Jerry Beck. Next up, Check It 3.0. This was also a really good era that ran from 2013 to 2015, with Check It 4.0 running from 2015 to 2016. It was the latter half of the CN Renaissance, featuring shows such as Clarence, Steven Universe, Uncle Grandpa, We Bare Bears, and Over the Garden Wall. The reason why I put Check It 3.0 below Check It 1.0 is because the variety got worse, and they started to slowly remove older shows from the channel. On the other hand, what makes Check It 3.0 slightly superior is that the branding is a bit more abstract and personalized, featuring the characters in all sorts of shapes, sizes, and colors in the bumpers. I found it creative. Too bad that towards the end of this era, it was the beginning of the end. Now we're getting to the good ones. Now for Check It 1.0 and 2.0, which ran from 2010 to 2013. This was my childhood. The branding may seem a bit generic, but this was the renaissance of Cartoon Network and the grand comeback of the channel. We got Regular Show, Adventure Time, Gumball, The Looney Tunes Show, and so much more. I also love how that's reminiscent of the Checkerboard Era, but in a more modernized way, using the new characters. Also, the soundtracks to use for the station IDs and next bumpers were iconic. It was controversial for the time, but their strategy to aim for a more older kid and teen audience was a good idea, and allowed for more mature shows, storylines, and humor, and had an impact on the gray area cartoon genre. Not only that, but the Check It era as a whole had the best scheduling in the entire channel's history in my opinion. They aired the perfect mix of new and old. They played banger new cartoons, older Cartoon Network shows, and even classic cartoons in the rotation. It was a real shame when they got rid of the Cartoon Planet block. They should have created new skits for the block and added more segments of the CN shows, rather than playing the same episodes repeatedly. Well, thankfully, we have checkered past now. The second best era of Cartoon Network is Powerhouse, which ran from 1998 all the way up until 2004. Honestly, the Powerhouse era had the best slogan, that being, the best place for cartoons. This is also the most bombastic and cartoonish era of them all, and it was full of energy. This is when the channel became more invested in original programming, and began their Cartoons Fridays block. The classics would still continue the air on the channel on a regular basis, but were noticeably starting to be phased out and moved to the dedicated Boomerang channel that was launched in 2000. The highlight of this era has to be the Powerhouse theme that plays in the bumpers. It defines the channel and its genius. The next bumpers featured gags from classic cartoons, such as anvils and pianos falling out of the sky in Chuck Jones Fair. Around this time, they introduced anime to the network and Toonami began to have a bigger presence. I don't think there's even any bad qualities or downsides to this era and branding. It's almost perfect. And now, the best Cartoon Network era of all time is CN City, which ran from 2004 to 2007. I had a tough time deciding whether Powerhouse or CN City was better, and it was some close competition, almost a tie. I ultimately decided on CN City, since Animal Logic, the studio that designed the bumpers, went above and beyond to make these bumpers, and it's so amusing to see the characters from all these shows, at the same time, interacting with each other and all living in the same city. The only downside with the City era is that they removed all classic programming along with the Boomerang block in October 2004, except for Tom and Jerry and Scooby-Doo. Other than that, this era was phenomenal. The bumpers, new series, the scheduling, everything all around was cool. People still talk about this era to this day, and there are collections of the bumpers all over YouTube. Even though I did not grow up with this era, since it's physically impossible to remember anything before age 2, I believe this era is truly amazing. Nothing can top this, except arguably Powerhouse. Over the years, Cartoon Network has had some absolutely incredible eras, some that were the worst in television history, and a good chunk of them that were just really mediocre. Right now, the channel is in one of those middle-of-the-road eras, but it could pick back up again once some new shows finally come out in the coming years. Although it doesn't help that cable TV is on life support, and the owners of Warner Bros. Discovery do not know how to run a company. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share, notify, and check out other videos on the channel. You may like them. What is your favorite Cartoon Network branding era, and why? Let me know in the comments.